The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. Therefore I will hope in him.
Hello, welcome to our Bible study. My name is Clint McElroy, and today we'll be in 1 Kings chapter 2. We will be meeting today at 10 a.m., so please join us if you can. If you're sick in any way, please don't come to the auditorium, but instead stay home and enjoy the streaming service. We'll also be meeting at 9 a.m. for classes, so please join us for those as well. If you care to, you're welcome to join us in the auditorium to watch this class on the large screen there. We want everyone to remember that we have these English Standard Versions available from the World Bible School. If you'd care to have one, please contact our church office and we'll make arrangements to get you one. We have many people on our sick list, so please refer to our bulletin for more information about those, and do keep them in your prayers. As is our custom, we want to remember the story of the two men on the road to Emmaus. As they were on their journey, they were joined by a third man. When they got to their destination, that third man left them, and it turned out that third man was Jesus, resurrected from the dead. The two men, on reflecting on their journey with this third man, realized that while he had been with them, there had been a burning in their heart. It's that burning that they had in their heart that we hope to kindle in our own hearts as we become close to the Lord through a study of His Word. We also want to remember the admonitions of Leviticus chapter 19, to be holy, for the Lord our God is holy. And we want to remember the story of Rehoboam and Jeroboam, which we will forego reviewing at this moment because it will be part of our class studies in short order. We will be looking at 1 Kings chapter 2 today, which contains material that was covered ever so briefly in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, the death of King David. But it contains an alternate version of some of the things that happened in that short period of time, and we hope that you'll be encouraged by looking at this different perspective. 1 Kings chapter 2 from the English Standard Version. When David's time to die drew near, he commanded Solomon his son, saying, I am about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do, and wherever you turn, that the Lord may establish his word that he spoke concerning me, saying, If your sons pay close attention to their way, to walk before me in faithfulness, with all their heart, and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. Verse 5. Moreover, you also know what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, how he dealt with the two commanders of the armies of Israel, Abner the son of Ner, and Amasa the son of Jether, whom he killed, avenging in time of peace for blood that had been shed in war, and putting the blood of war on the belt around his waist, and on the sandals of his feet. Act therefore according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to Sheol in peace. Verse 7. But deal loyally with the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, and let them be among those who eat at your table. For with such loyalty they met me when I fled from Absalom your brother. And there is also with you Shemiah the son of Gera the Benjaminite from Bahurim, who cursed me with a grievous curse on the day when I went to Mahanaim. But when he came down to meet me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. Now therefore do not hold him guiltless, for you are a wise man. You will know what you ought to do with him. and you shall bring his gray head down with blood to Sheol. Verse 10. Then David slept with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David. And the time that David reigned over Israel was 40 years. He reigned 7 years in Hebron, and 33 years in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established. Verse 13. Then Adonijah the son of Haggith came to Bathsheba the mother of Solomon, and she said, Do you come peacefully? He said, Peacefully. Then he said, I have something to say to you. She said, Speak. He said, You know that the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel fully expected me to reign. However, the kingdom has turned about and become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. And now I have one request to make of you. Do not refuse me. She said to him, Speak. And he said, Please ask King Solomon, he will not refuse you, to give me Abishag the Shunammite as my wife. Bathsheba said, Very well, I will speak for you to the king. Verse 19. So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him on behalf of Adonijah. And the king rose to meet her and bowed down to her. Then he sat on his throne and had a seat brought for the king's mother, and she sat on his right. Then she said, I have one small request to make of you. Do not refuse me. And the king said to her, Make your request, my mother, for I will not refuse you. Verse 21. She said, Let Abishag the Shunammite be given to Adonijah your brother as his wife. King Solomon answered his mother, And why do you ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom also, for he is my older brother, and on his side are Abiathar the priest and Joab the son of Zeruiah. Verse 23. Then King Solomon swore by the Lord, saying, God do so to me, and more also, if this word does not cost Adonijah his life. Now therefore, as the Lord lives, who has established me and placed me on the throne of David my father, and who has made me a house, as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death today. So King Solomon sent Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he struck him down, and he died. Verse 26. And to Abiathar the priest the king said, Go to Anathoth, to your estate, for you deserve death, but I will not at this time put you to death, because you carried the ark of the Lord God before David my father, and because you shared in all my father's afflictions. So Solomon expelled Abiathar from being priest to the Lord, thus fulfilling the word of the Lord that he had spoken concerning the house of Eli and Shiloh. Verse 28. When the news came to Joab, for Joab had supported Adonijah, although he had not supported Absalom, Joab fled to the tent of the Lord and caught hold of the horns of the altar. And when it was told King Solomon, Joab has fled to the tent of the Lord, and behold, he is beside the altar, Solomon said to Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, saying, Go strike him down. Verse 30. So Benaiah came to the tent of the Lord and said to him, The king commands, Come out. But he said, No, I will die here. Then Benaiah brought the king word again, saying, Thus said Joab, and thus he answered me. The king replied to him, Do as he has said. Strike him down and bury him, and thus take away from me and from my father's house the guilt for the blood that Joab shed without cause. The Lord will bring back his bloody deeds on his own head, because without the knowledge of my father David, he attacked and killed with the sword 2 men more righteous and better than himself, Abner the son of Ner, commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa the son of Jether, commander of the army of Judah. Verse 33. So shall their blood come back on the head of Joab and on the head of his descendants forever. But for David and for his descendants and for his house and for his throne there shall be peace from the Lord forevermore. Then Benaiah the son of Jehoiada went up and struck him down and put him to death, and he was buried in his own house in the wilderness. The king put Benaiah the son of Jehoiada over the army in place of Joab, and the king put Zadok the priest in the place of Abiathar. Verse 36. Then the king sent and summoned Shemaiah and said to him, Build yourself a house in Jerusalem and dwell there, and do not go out from there to any place whatever. For on the day you go out and cross the brook Kidron, know for certain that you shall die. Your blood shall be on your own head. Verse 38. And Shemaiah said to the king, What you say is good. As my lord the king has said, so will your servant do. So Shemaiah lived in Jerusalem many days. Verse 39. But it happened at the end of 3 years that 2 of Shemaiah's servants ran away to Achish, son of Maacah, king of Gath. And when it was told to Shemaiah, Behold, your servants are in Gath, Shemaiah rose and saddled a donkey and went to Gath to Achish to seek his servants. Shemaiah went and brought his servants from Gath. Verse 41. And when Solomon was told that Shemaiah had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and returned, the king sent and summoned Shemaiah and said to him, Did I not make you swear by the Lord and solemnly warn you, saying, Know for certain that on the day you go out and go to any place whatever, you shall die? And you said to me, What you say is good, I will obey. Verse 43. Why then have you not kept your oath to the Lord and the commandment with which I commanded you? The king also said to Shemaiah, You know in your own heart all the harm that you did to David my father. So the Lord will bring back your harm on your own head. But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. Then the king commanded Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he went out and struck him down, and he died. So the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. Okay. Wow, what an incredibly harsh story. It's not my favorite story by any means, and it's just terrible, the machinations that occur within a royal household of any kind. And here we have these detailed descriptions of these terrible things occurring in David's own household, and how Solomon became ruler after David in less than a flattering light, I have to say, in my own opinion. These things are a shadow on David's legacy, and it's a really strange way, in my mind, for Solomon, who was to be the one who built the temple, to have to begin his established reign over the house of Israel by killing these people. So last week we looked at 1 Kings chapter 1, how the king had advanced in years and had this woman, Abishag the Shunammite, found. First of all, she was found. She was a virgin. She was brought into the king to basically be a nurse to him and keep him warm with her own body heat. And this is the role that she played. She was the king's nurse and warmth, body warmth. And as the story progressed, Adonijah is described as being kind of big-headed. He rode around Jerusalem advertising his greatness. The king never did anything to stop him, although the king had apparently made it clear that Adonijah was not going to be the king of Israel. Solomon was. This was already established, and it's described again later in this story. So we come into 1 Kings with the understanding that David intended for Solomon to be king after him, as we find in 2 Samuel and in 1 Chronicles. So we have Adonijah basically engaged in what is essentially a soft coup d'etat. He was basically taking over the kingdom without his father's authorization. And who knows how it might have played out had he been more inclusive, if he'd gone to his father and asked and tried to make himself more legitimate in the eyes of his father. This might have played out a different way, and I often wonder how it might have played out, because Adonijah had favor of these other men. He had the favor of Abiathar and of Joab. Now, these were both men that did not stand highly in David's mind except in their service to him. So it's interesting. These men served David loyally up to this point throughout his entire reign. And I guess that's an important phrase, up to this point. When you're a king, men should serve you always, not up to a point. So that is probably a very apt thought there to give some consideration to. So these men went with Adonijah to set himself up as king, and he offered a great number of sacrifices, but he didn't invite some other people. He didn't invite Nathan the prophet, nor did he invite Benaiah the son of Jehoiada. And I don't know why we have to always identify Benaiah as the son of Jehoiada. except to completely confound the tongues of people who want to speak those words. That said, the story is that Nathan comes to Bathsheba while Adonijah is away to set himself up as king, and describes to her what's going on, which is an immediate threat to the safety of both Bathsheba and Solomon. She, to her credit, recognizes this and immediately makes a plan with Nathan to present this information to David. And I'm abbreviating this story greatly. It's much more prolonged in the reading of the chapter, but we need to get on to chapter 2. That having been done, David was finally informed. David immediately sets forward to anoint Solomon king, which this is, I think, the second time in this way of telling. So Solomon was basically asserted as king twice, and I believe this is the second time here. So Solomon is set up as king over Israel once again, and at the end of verse 40, there's great rejoicing in all Israel because of this great and wondrous thing. So David used Benaiah the son of Jehoiada and Nathan the prophet and the Cherethites and Pelethites, which were the house guard and the guard of Jerusalem, to make sure that he had support from military might as well as the rest. So they blew the trumpet, and there was a great celebration as everyone yelled out, "Long live King Solomon." Well, back at Adonijah's place, where he was with Joab and Abiathar, Joab hears this and wonders what the commotion is in the city. And then Jonathan comes up, who is welcomed in their midst. And Jonathan tells the group, "You're not going to like my news." And he says that David has made Solomon king. And of course, everyone at the party understands the implications of that. That means they're all essentially traitors, and that he has brought a blight on them because he's implicated them in this treacherous behavior. So they all kind of slink away to try to get away and set some distance between themselves and this thing that has been done. In verse 49, the guests of Adonijah trembled and rose, and each went his own way. Adonijah was afraid, so he ran to where the altar was and took the horns of the altar. And I'm not still clear on exactly how the altar was situated at this point. This was not the altar at the temple, because the temple wasn't built yet. The altar was either with the tabernacle or with the Ark of the Covenant, and I'm not clear on that. But anyway, Adonijah has got hold of the horns, and he doesn't want to let go because he fears that if he lets go, he'll be killed for this treachery that he's engaged in. And so in verse 52, Solomon says, "If he will show himself a worthy man, not one of his hairs shall fall to the earth. But if wickedness is found in him, he shall die." So they went and brought Adonijah down, and he paid homage to King Solomon and went to his house. And that's the way the story should have ended. That should have been the end of it all. But we go into chapter 2. David confides to Solomon that he shall die, and he makes these statements that are similar to what we read in chapters 28 and 29 of 1 Chronicles, but they are different. He says, "I'm about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn, that the Lord may establish his word that he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons pay close attention to their way, to walk before me in faithfulness with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel." What a wonderful promise to have as a legacy from God. And he shares this with Solomon, and this is what he wanted most. But then we have this departure from his feelings that he's expressed before in other places with this passage that follows about Joab the son of Zeruiah, and how he wanted Solomon to be careful with Joab. He warned him about Joab. He warned him about Shemiah. He said that these men had done these treacherous things toward him, and he wanted neither one of them to go down to Sheol without blood. So he he wanted them killed, but he didn't want necessarily that Solomon should go straightway and kill them. But he suspected that both the men would be guilty of treachery at some later point, and he wanted to warn Solomon against them. And so he does this with the expectation that Solomon would have to follow through by killing both of these men, as he describes here. And this is kind of a sad thing. I mean, Joab's not my favorite person. Abner was a much more favorite character in the stories we've read. Abner had a lot of shortcomings. I'm not forgiving the shortcomings of either man. But Joab did some amazing things for David in the name of David, to support David. And they weren't always the will of David, oddly enough. And that is, again, what David is warning Solomon about here, the things that Joab had done that were not his will. But he did even these things to support David, and most of them worked to David's benefit, even though they were not David's will. So again, these things are kind of troubling, that David held these things against these men in peace, against them even to the point of death, with the expectation that after his death they would be dealt with. Then in verse 10, David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. And the time that David reigned over Israel was 40 years. He reigned 7 years in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established. So this is David. This is the last of the story of David. And now we go forward in the story of Solomon and the legacy of David, which is every bit as important, if not more important, than the story of David. But David's example is set. When we die, that's it for us. We have no more ability to assert our will and to make known what our beliefs are. Which is part of the reason why I do these videos, is to help establish what my desire is for those that come after me. But it's a kind of a melancholy feeling whenever I read these passages, because David's story, while it's set now, it's not over. David's story continues up to and through the life of Jesus Christ to this very day. The promise of David, the promise that God made to David, is still important and still significant to us all, not just to the house of David. So this is a very important thing that has been completed here. And it's interesting, though, to consider again that just because our lives are complete does not mean our story has to be ended. It means our effect on that story is done, but it's not necessarily the end of the effect of our lives on others. And that's an important thing, something to give a significant amount of consideration to. And then again, that's kind of why it's sad that David would have these vindictive statements to make about these men who, though they did not support him perfectly, did support him as king. He also, by the way, wanted to make sure that Barzillai the Gileadite was recognized and rewarded for his continued and unaverted loyalty throughout all of the trials that David faced. And that's a very minor point made here, but not minor at all in the life of Barzillai. What are all that he did for David, and the reward that David was basically making him here in these statements to Solomon. I'm sharing a lot of my opinion here, and I don't want that to be lost on whoever's listening. These are my opinions about these passages. The story of David is significant. Most anyone who believes in a Christian walk would agree that David's walk is very important. They may have very drastic different opinions about this particular story of David, so do keep that in mind, that this is my opinion about this passage here and how I personally feel about it. But that said, it goes on to be fulfilled in the following passages here, as Adonijah now brings his own judgment upon him by approaching Bathsheba. And this is the last story we hear of Bathsheba, which is also kind of a sad thing. Bathsheba is now a widow of David, and she is sitting wherever she sits. And Adonijah approaches her and makes these statements after this kind of protocol of greeting one another, he says, "You know that the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel fully expected me to reign." So he sets his cards on the table. He basically says, "You know, I was going to be king, but Dad robbed me of that. However, the kingdom has turned about and become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord." He does recognize this was the will of the Lord, but he does this, I think, out of frustration and out of resentment, not because he was truly recognizing that this was the right thing. "And now I have one request to make of you. Do not refuse me." So he asks this as a favor from Bathsheba, who honestly does not owe him a favor. She was threatened by the possibility of him becoming king every bit as much as Solomon. That would have very much probably resulted in their death if it had stood, because they had already been declared, or Solomon had already been declared the next king by David, and he would have stood against that and would have probably had to kill Solomon as a result. Bathsheba agreed to do this thing, which was to ask Solomon to allow Abishag the Shunammite, the one who had nursed David, to become his wife, which on the surface doesn't seem like a big deal, but because Abishag had had this close relationship with David, it would have given some legitimacy to Adonijah's claim to the throne, which you could make the argument was what he was angling to do here. So Bathsheba goes to King Solomon. They make their presentations to one another, their greetings to one another. Solomon calls for a chair for Bathsheba to sit on, and then she makes this request. And as she was requesting it, she asks that he not refuse. And he says, "Make your request, my mother, for I will not refuse you," in verse 20. So that's an interesting thing. He makes the same statement that Bathsheba had made to Adonijah, that she would not refuse, he would not refuse. So in verse 21, she makes the request. And in verse 22, Solomon responds, "Why do you ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom also." So Solomon understood the implications of this in the most negative aspect possible, which is that Adonijah was asking this to lend legitimacy to a claim to the throne. And he responds in kind and very harshly. And he says, "As the Lord lives and has established me and placed me on the throne, Adonijah shall be put to death today." And so he sends Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, because that's the only way we can refer to Benaiah the son of Jehoiada as Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, because we don't have enough things to say. And he strikes him down and he died. So it's a terrible way to end for Adonijah. Adonijah just couldn't let it go, and it cost him his life. And Abiathar the priest, he said, "Go to Anathoth, to your estate, for you deserve death." So he attributed this as a conspiracy, and he was going to go after everybody that he thought might be involved. And Abiathar was one of those. So he exiled him to his home, and he took him out of the priesthood, which was, according to this passage, a fulfillment of what had been spoken concerning Eli and the house of Eli in Shiloh in verse 27. So again, a terrible way for someone who ostensibly had tried to serve the Lord and serve King David to have their end brought about. But he at least retained his life. When Joab heard of this, in verse 28, he runs and grabs the horns of the altar and doesn't want to let go. So King Solomon sends Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and in verse 30 we have one of the few references to Benaiah as Benaiah and not Benaiah the son of Jehoiada. He comes and says, "The king commands, come out," and Joab says, "No, I will die here." Benaiah comes back and says, "Thus and so said Joab," regarding this exchange. And King Solomon says, "Do as he said, strike him down and bury him, and thus take away from me and from my father's house the guilt of the blood that Joab shed without cause." And goes on to describe why this was what he was talking about. The attack that Joab had made on Abner and against Amasa were things that troubled David the rest of his life. So Benaiah tells this to Solomon, and Solomon responds. And then in verse 34, Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, went up and struck him down and put him to death, and he was buried in his own house in the wilderness. Then the king put Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, over the army in place of Joab, and the king put Zadok the priest in the place of Abiathar. So these became part of his administration. The king sent and summoned Shemaiah, so he's not done. And he gives instruction to Shemaiah to build a house in Jerusalem and stay there. Don't go anywhere. Shemaiah agrees that this was a good thing. It was kind of the king to do this. And he does it. And he lives there for 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, 2 of his servants run to Ashish, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, the son of Maacah, the king of Gath, which, if you'll recall, is an area, I think, controlled by the Philistines. So Shemaiah goes, saddles a donkey, and retrieves his slaves and comes back. And this is kind of a weird thing. Why would he do this? Well, he got kind of comfortable, got kind of accustomed to living, and this is a dangerous thing. We should always be mindful of the instruction of the Lord. This is where a lot of failure occurs. We become accustomed to doing what we do, and then we take advantage of a situation that presents itself. And there was nothing advantageous here. At most, he spares the loss of these servants, but he would have been better off to do that and live than recover these servants or slaves and die, which is what happens. He comes back, Solomon summons him and says, "Why are you doing this? Why did you do this? Know that what you did hurt my father, and as a result, these things will coming back on you, and you'll go to your grave knowing that this was your own fault. This has all come about because of your own stupidity, basically, and lack of compassion for my father." But he goes on. This is an odd thing in verse 45. King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. The king commanded Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he went out and struck him down, and he died. So Solomon ends this basically judgment against Shemaiah with this self-serving blessing, which is odd. And I may be reading that incorrectly, but that's the way it looks like it's being done there. And that to me is kind of strange. And then, of course, we have another situation with Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, doing the deed. So this is the role of the person who sits at the head of the army of Israel. So the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. So here we kind of end this story, which is a way, way different story than what we see at the end of First Chronicles. It's very interesting to see this, in my opinion, the contrast of this personal vendetta playing out against these men who offended David throughout his reign, as opposed to the story as told in First Chronicles, which was more so about the plans David had for the temple and how he wanted Solomon to make that his priority. And that is, again, in retrospect and hindsight, if you look at how these stories were recorded and the purpose of each of them, it should be kind of obvious why that was. So here we have a story recounted that tells the story of David in a more personal fashion, as opposed to the one in First Chronicles, which is told to encourage the people as they go back to rebuild Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. So those were very different purposes, and now we see this again playing out in this passage. So next time we'll continue into chapter 3, which more so parallels some stuff happening in Second Chronicles. So that's going to be kind of the first time we see some stuff lining up there, and we'll make comment as necessary to support that. I hope you found a word of encouragement in today's study. It's certainly a disconcerting thing to look at the way that David ended his reign from this perspective. It's kind of sad that he had this on his heart this whole time, when the Lord had blessed him in so many ways, up to and including his son Solomon, who would be the one who would build a temple in such a glorious fashion. We will be meeting today at 10 a.m., so please join us if you can. Hope to see you there. If you're sick in any way, please don't come to the auditorium, but instead stay home and enjoy the streaming service. God bless. Have a great week.